Welcome back to 2021. I know, guys, I wish we could stay in the 80s and 90s forever, but we can't. Those were good times to be alive, though. Big hair, REO Speedwagon, Def Leppard, Fox Bodies, third gen Camaros, right? Great time to be alive. But not so great of a time for the aftermarket world in these cars. Although the Fox Body did pretty much create the big buzz, the big push, if you will, in the aftermarket world, it really didn't start until one thing changed under the hood. Let's take a trip real quick down memory lane. These Fox Body Mustangs, which back in the day, they were not called Fox Bodies. And I know that triggers a lot of people nowadays. They're like, well, why do you keep calling them a Fox Body? Well, it's a way to signify which car I'm talking about, right? If I say 5.0 or 5.0 or something like that, you guys are still gonna be thinking about the Coyotes. If I say a Mustang GT, there again, still thinking about the new cars. Back in the day, we called these cars, you know, GTs, 5.0s, 5.0s, whatever the case may be. The Fox Body Mustang back in the 80s wasn't a powerhouse. We all know that, right? Cars ran pretty good, no doubt. And they could compete with, you know, Camaros, Corvettes, even with a really good driver, and even Grand Nationals. Now, a lot of people will argue that point, but they absolutely could compete with Grand Nationals and other cars like that. There wasn't a lot of aftermarket parts out there for the third gen Camaro and stuff like that, Corvettes. I'm talking engine mods, right? Of course, you had companies like Cervini's, and you had Flowmaster exhaust, and you had things like that, aftermarket wheel companies. You know, you had some underdrive pulleys. There were things out there, but not to the level they are today, and there's a good reason for that. The problem with these cars early on, you couldn't really put heads, cam, intake, stuff like that on. They didn't like it. So, therefore, the aftermarket companies didn't really offer a lot. But in 1989, all of that changed with this right here. Before the mass air meter, you couldn't do a lot to these cars. You could do underdrive pulleys, exhaust, all that type of stuff, right? You could put an intake on them, but not a lot of companies really had anything, right? Up till the year 1988, you guys remember, there just wasn't a lot of options, right? But let's talk about some of the free mods that you could have done to a Fox Body pre-mass air. So before the mass air meter, you could do a short belt. So basically you would just bypass your smog pump here. You literally could bypass power steering and everything if you wanted to. I've seen guys do that back in the day, and there is horsepower to be gained there. Trust me, it made a difference. You could take your temperature sensor over here. You could actually buy a new sensor and drop it in a bucket of ice, in like a little canister of ice, and trick the computer to think that it was running cold. That means it would get more fuel and more timing. That was a trick that very, very few people talked about, but some people were doing it back in the day. You could come in here, and we called them, they're air silencers, but we called them turds back in the day. You could get back here and pull that on the inside of your fender out, gain a little bit right there. So these are some of the free mods that you could do back before the mass air cars come out. I am fully aware that there were camshafts that you could run with a speed density car. I just don't ever remember anybody running them back in the day, so they really weren't very popular. I think Comp Cams or somebody like that made a camshaft that was speed density friendly, if you will, but not a lot of people ran them. In '89 though, when that mass air came out, everything changed. You can now put heads, cam, intake, supercharger if you wanted to, turbo, and you literally didn't even have to get the car retuned. And yes, you heard me correct. Guys, you could put 5 pounds of boost on a car like this with 30-pound injectors, sometimes even 24, and you could actually run this car without having to have a tune. Now, is it risky? Absolutely. Would I tell you to do that? No. I'm just letting you guys know that's how well these computers compensated. Guys, these cars, 1989 was when it all changed. This is when the aftermarket world exploded. Guys, you had companies like Elderbrock, TrickFlow, Comp Cams, Lunati. I mean, you could do anything you wanted to under the sun with these. And that's when these cars really became competitive. Guys, in 1989, it was such a game changer. You could see Fox Bodies running up and down the road, supercharged, turbo, big cam, heads, intake, all of this stuff, and you just didn't see that before. These fuel injected cars were taboo whenever they first come out. Nobody used to mess with them. They were like, oh, not messing with that. I don't understand it. I know carbureted. I don't know that. That was the mindset of everybody. So for years, these things really weren't touched. Now, sure, like I said, people modified them, but you couldn't really tell a difference in the sound. I mean, you know, stuff like that. They just sounded like a stock car. But these cars were now starting to run around with camshafts. Now we had the B cam, the E cam, the F cam, the Wolverine 1087 cam, Lunati's. Guys, there were so many cams out there available for these cars. It was absolutely nuts. And no other car came close in the aftermarket world. I'm telling you, third gen Camaros and Trans Ams and stuff like that, no sir. And nobody wanted to work on those cars. People started to realize that the FOXBODY Mustang was actually pretty easy to modify. Pretty forgiving. You could do about whatever you wanted to it. Now, I do want to backtrack a little bit because I know somebody's going to call me out on this if you already haven't. But you can tune a speed density car. Absolutely you can. You can put heads, cam, intake, all that type of stuff. You can do that with a speed density car. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and take you over here to this car because the Calypso is speed density. So like I said, this car is speed density and it's got a turbo on it. So it can be tuned, no problem. But back in 87, 88, good luck finding a tuner that's gonna go in and know what they're doing and have a dyno and all that type stuff. Back before all of this fuel injection, if you wanted your car tuned, you called your buddy over, you grabbed a Coors Light and a couple packs of cigarettes and you got out there and you tuned your car with a screwdriver and a wrench and a vacuum gauge. That's how you tuned them. The crazy thing is these FOXBODYs are not so different than your cars nowadays, than your new 5.0s, your new Coyotes, whatever the case may be. If you want this car tuned, you need to put it on a dyno. You need to hook it up to a computer. So it's crazy, but right before that, 1985 and back, there wasn't anything you could do. You had to tune them with a screwdriver. There was a throttle body injection like for a year or two, but we're not gonna talk about that. Now, there were plenty of cars out there before the FOXBODY that were fuel injected. I'm not saying that they're the first. What I'm saying is they really set the tone for the aftermarket world, and we all owe the FOXBODY a big thanks. Thank you to the mass air meter on the FOXBODY in 1989 because that's what changed the game. I just thought it'd be cool to come out here and talk to you guys about the mass air meter. I've not really heard anybody else cover it, so I thought it'd be cool to come out here and share that with you guys. But I'm gonna go ahead, wrap this video up, and as always, thanks for watching. Guys, the late 80s and early 90s was a really fun time to be alive. The 80s weren't quite so kind to our FOXBODYs. We loved them, but horsepower was down. But in the late 80s, it all changed. I'm going to show you under the hood what Ford did to make the aftermarket world explode.